Thanks for joining me for part 2 of how to use security. In this tutorial, we're going to go ahead and create our own security tables, and we're going to use events to enforce our security rules. Here are some example design requirements for this particular solution. So the login requirements are that every user can only belong to a single login group, and there's only going to be 2 login groups, administrators and users. And then the logic requirements, or the business rules for the customer form, is that the administrators can see everything, but members of the user group cannot see the customer ID, and the city field is disabled. Well, let's get over to Servoy Developer and make this happen. So I've done some prep work on this solution. I've created the customer's form. It's a very basic form. And I've also created some global variables. Current group, user underscore name, and user underscore password. I've also created a very simple login form. And I've also put a login button, and I've attached a method to it that has no code in it yet. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create our 2 tables that we need, users and groups. And to do that, we're going to come over here to the database servers and expand that node. And I'm going to use the user data connection, so I'm going to simply click on it, and then come down here to the bottom and click Create Table. The first table that we're going to create is called Users. So by default, we get a user ID that's an integer. We're going to add a column, and we're going to type in user underscore name, and that's going to be text. We'll add another column, and that's going to be user password. That will also be text. And we'll add a third column called group ID, and that's going to be an integer. So now we just save this table. I'm going to use Control S, and the table is created. Now we're going to make another table. That table is going to be called Groups. And this is simply just going to have the group ID and the group name. And again, I'm going to use Control S to save. And now we're done creating the tables. So we can close these definitions up here by clicking the X. Now we need a form to create the new user records. So I'm going to click on my login form. So in Servoy, we can just copy-paste forms. I'm going to come down here to my login form, right-click, and say Copy. And then I'm going to click on my Forms node and right-click and choose Paste. Now I have a form called Login Copy. So I'm going to right-click and open that form in the Form Designer. So there's a couple things that we need to do to this form. The first thing that we're going to do is change the name from Login Copy to New User. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to scroll down to the bottom, and we're going to change the table that this is attached to. We're going to want to attach it to the Users table in the user data connection. So I'm going to double click. To change the table, scroll down here to our user data and choose the users table. Now we're going to change the login button to new user. And then finally we're going to add our groups global variable to this so that we can choose the group to assign to this user. Add the new field, our current group, click OK. Next, we'll go ahead and click on our new user button. And we don't want to use the button login, we want to use a different method. Now when we duplicated this form, it also duplicated this method. So we're just going to go ahead and reuse the same method since it's already attached to this button, but we're going to change the name. So to do that, I'm going to come over here to the new user form, click on it, and right-click on the button login method, and say Open in Script Editor. So we're going to change our function name from button login to new user, and save that. Control S for save. Here I'll minimize the properties. And now we can add some code to our new user method. So we're going to come down here, expand the new user node, and I'm going to click on the controller object, which controls new records, finds, etc. I'm going to scroll down until I see new record, double click, and then there's an optional parameter add on top. We're going to set that to false. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and basically, once this new record is created, we're going to set the fields to the values that are in our global variables. So if I come down and click on the selected record, I can see a list of all of the columns that are there. I'll go ahead and do the first one for you. So we're going to double click username, or I could have typed it, and that's going to equal our global field. So I can type globals dot, and I'm going to choose username. All right, so we're going to set the username on the new user record to whatever's in that global field called username. And then we're going to do the same thing for the other two fields. Both the user password and then the group ID is going to come from the global called current group. So that's all there is to it. For this simple method, we're going to go ahead and save. Now, in your real method, in your real solution, you're going to probably add a lot more logic in here that will go and check to make sure that that user doesn't already exist or that the username and password don't already exist. So for this simple example, we're just going to blindly create the new record. Now we need to create one more new form, and that new form is going to be so that we can type in the groups that we want to add. And in this case, we're just going to have two records in that table, which is going to be the administrators and the users. So I'll come over to Forms, right-click, and say New Form. We're going to call ours Groups, and it's going to be based on the user data groups. I'm going to say Next. And there's only two columns in there, the ID and the name. We'll put those both on the form. We'll save that using Control-S.